Last night, Israeli Foreign Minister Shimon Peres spoke to the American-Israel Public Affairs Committee. The group's holding a 3-day conference here in Washington. Also speaking at this event, former American Red Cross President Bernadine Healy. This is just over an hour.
Good evening. I am Beverly Canold, a member of AIPAC's Board of Directors. Our country's history, the story of our people, is in large measure the story of the lone individual, the man or woman of great courage who showed strength in the face of adversity. Individuals who bucked the system, who voiced unpopular opinions, whose courage carried them against a tide of naysayers and doubters. And each protagonist, whether attaining success or falling somewhere short of his or her goal, paves the way for the next brave soul to step forward and say the words, "I disagree." Such is the history of Dr. Bernadine Healy, who saw a wrong Such is the history, as you know, of Dr. Bernadine Healy, who saw a wrong and tried to make it right. Above the mantel in her former office at the Red Cross, Bernadine Healy displayed the words of her hero, Clara Barton, founder of the Red Cross. The words say, "It irritates me to be told how things have always been done. I defy the tyranny of precedent." Bernadine Healy has defied the traditions, if not the tyranny, of precedent for years now. She became a doctor, a cardiologist, when few women were entering medicine. She ran for the United States Senate. That race she lost. She was diagnosed with a brain tumor and told she had 3 months to live. That was 3 years ago. And she told an American icon, the Red Cross, that their way of doing business when it came to Israel was wrong and immoral. It irritates Bernadine Healy to be told how things have always been done. In 1999, the Ohio native and mother of 2 took on the job of president of the Red Cross, the quasi-governmental agency that generates about $3 billion a year in revenues and has more than 1,000 chapters nationwide. Healy never strayed from important fights, seeking to improve the organization in a host of ways. She encountered resistance, to say the least. But in the midst of dealing with the disaster of 9/11 and a myriad of issues surrounding the Red Cross, Bernadine continued to push forward on a matter that ultimately would cost her her job. It was a fight she had begun to wage just 2 months after becoming president. The International Red Cross has long opposed the inclusion of Israel's Red Shield of David, the Magen David Adom, from the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies. Healy decided it was time to compel the international movement to accept the Star of David as an emblem. In September 1999, Healy flew to Geneva to address a large assembly of the International Red Cross movement. She asked former Secretary of State Lawrence Eagleburger to serve as her ambassador to the assembly on the Israel issue. Bernadine refused to turn a blind eye on a moral wrong, Eagleburger later wrote in a Washington Post op-ed. Persuaded by her passion, the American Red Cross agreed to start withholding its $4.5 million annual dues to the International Federation. The Federation was furious. After September 11th, a high-ranking official from Geneva flew to the United States to persuade the American Red Cross to resume paying its dues. The American board members blinked. They feared that the matter would be perceived as a political issue for an organization that prides itself on neutrality. Behind closed doors and without Healy's knowledge, the executive committee of the board voted 9-1 to stop withholding their dues. It was October 3rd, and a wave of suicide bombings and shooting attacks had claimed the lives of more than 180 Israelis in just 12 months. "You can't do this," Healy told the executive committee members. "Deserting Israel now, what kind of signal are you sending?" Well-meaning colleagues told Healy to abandon the issue if she wanted to keep her job. Others began a campaign to convince local chapters that the Israel issue would make it difficult for them to raise local dollars. By the end of October, Bernadine Healy was forced to resign, but nobody and nothing can force her silence. Bernadine Healy knows that silence equals acceptance, and when there is a wrong that needs to be corrected, she will never be silent. I'm looking for Okay, you hold it. Dr. Healy, it is my great honor and privilege to be able to present you with this gift. Howard, would you hold it up, please? I don't want to drop it. As a symbol of our appreciation for your deep commitment to what is just, right, and worthy. Humble as this earthenware vessel may appear to be, it dates back to a glorious era of the Jewish people, one with far-reaching implications for our Western civilization. This beaker was fashioned on a potter's wheel in the land of Israel 3,000 years ago. At the very time when King David was consolidating the ancient Jewish kingdom in the land of our ancestors. This era, during the time of the judges, gave tangible expression to a revolutionary moral code of the most exacting ethical standards. Those lofty standards continue to inspire and guide us to this day. Chazak, Chazak, be strong and of good courage. These are the words of the first judge, Joshua. Dr. Healy, your strength, your courage inspires us all. May May our gift to you tonight remind you of our community's appreciation and admiration for who you are and for what you stand. Please offer a warm welcome to the courageous, the determined Dr. Bernadine Healy.
I must tell you, you have made it all worthwhile. And I thank you from all four chambers of my heart. For the cardiologist out there. Foreign Minister Perez, wonderful ladies and gentlemen, my colleagues and my friends, I am so honored and humbled to be here. Before coming in from Cleveland this afternoon, my husband said, "You know, Bernie, if only you hadn't been such an activist." And I said, "Oh, that's what you're married." But he stands with me too. As a physician, I am no stranger to human suffering, and I am no stranger to the worst kinds of diseases. But the disease of terrorism may be one of the most horrific. I was asked to comment a little bit about some of the American terrorism, what we experienced on September 11th, which I saw up close and personal for a period of almost 2 months. And indeed, it does relate to the issue of Magen David Adom, and don't forget that. I will certainly not forget the eerie feeling of an evacuated downtown Washington. I stood on the top steps between those two giant marble pillars of the Red Cross on 17th Street, our big headquarters building, on September 11th. On that afternoon, I looked around and saw deserted buildings. I saw streets without cars, without pedestrians. The quiet was broken by the military helicopters that were circling above. The only other humans in this panorama were the police, who were blocking off the streets around us with yellow tape, and the snipers in their black jackets and helmets, very much like the ones I saw coming in, that were perched on top of that evacuated White House as the president was somewhere in the skies in Air Force One, not sure where he could land. This is America. I will not forget the Pentagon that I saw that very evening, this mighty symbol of our national security. It was in flames, partly collapsed as if it had been hit by an earthquake. The spotlights on that evening magnified this horrible, hideous scene. The hordes of firefighters on extended ladders were swarming all over the roof of that injured building. They seemed so little and so vulnerable against this monstrous terrorist destruction. The plane, that American plane filled with innocent life, that was turned into a weapon of mass destruction by utter evil, that plane could not be seen. I looked so hard for it. Some told me that it had melted, making the sight somehow even worse. A crematory for the almost 200 souls who faced a terrifying death only a few hours before. I will not forget the spontaneous outpouring of Americans from all walks of life to give a piece of themselves, to give some blood, knowing full well that there were no survivors, or almost no survivors, but knowing that this was the beginning. This was beginning of a war. This was not the end, and that we must be ready. Our headquarters, those big marble buildings, became a temple of grieving as hundreds sat in the waiting rooms from early in the morning until midnight, day after day, somberly talking to their neighbors. One afternoon, I asked our choir to serenade the group. As the choir sang "God Bless America," people started to embrace, to hug, to cry, and as the song crescendoed, they spontaneously stood up, almost as one group, and they cheered, some standing on their seats. They stood up with passion. They stood up with an air of defiance. They would prevail, and they would not cower. And that, indeed, is the response to terrorism. That is the response to terrorism that we Americans felt. It is the response to terrorism that we see in the eyes and the minds and the hearts of all Israel. I must confess, by the way, I've got to tell you something, though. In my entire life in medicine, I have never once seen a medical waiting room filled with people cheering. But most of all, in my experiences after 9/11, I will tell you there was one that was most unforgettable. It was a mother. It was a mother that I encountered in New York 2 days after the attack. Amidst a crush of people in search of missing loved ones, she stood patiently waiting in line in unbelievable heat to give information about her 22-year-old daughter who worked on the 100th floor of the World Trade Center. This stoic mom, a small Asian woman about my age, beamed as she told me about her daughter, the economics major who recently graduated from college. To her, I was the Red Cross doctor, but also a mom. When she showed me her pictures, I was utterly taken aback. Her smiling, bright-eyed daughter looked just like mine. I told her I had a 22-year-old who also just graduated, and they looked alike. And at that point, we spontaneously embraced, and suddenly she began to sob uncontrollably. I felt her unbearable suffering, and I did what I was trained not to do. I sobbed with her. In my life as a doctor, I have seen family grief. I have seen suffering so many times, but never have I seen this kind of agony. To me then and now, that mom represents everything that is hideous about terrorism. And it doesn't matter if it is New York or Tel Aviv. Whether it is a terrorist attack on a trade tower overlooking the Statue of Liberty, or a terrorist slaughter at a Passover gathering celebrating the deliverance of the Jewish people from slavery, it is all the same. If we only remember 9/11 as we must, we understand the terrorism that Israel faces every day. Only worse, because Israel's very existence as a nation and as a people is threatened every day. I keep hearing that the solutions must be political, not military. Now, I must confess I am no maven of national security. But to me, the solutions must be both, but they must be much more than that. It must be about morality first. The solution must first be about values and about principles. In some perverted way, the response to acts of terrorism seems now to be criticized as being worse than the terrorist acts themselves. We must examine the moral basis of this. Moral relativism will not uproot, it will never uproot the abject evil of hate and terrorism. In a chilling editorial that I hope most of you saw yesterday in the New York Times, it was stated, quote, "Just as the attacks of 9/11 forced Americans to face the fact that there are deadly serious groups seeking to destroy us, so some of the anti-Semitic actions in Europe in recent months cause us to wonder whether 6 decades after the Holocaust we are witnessing a resurgence of the virulent hatred that caused it. I would add to that the smoldering matter of Magen David Adom as I saw it up close and personal. For 50 years, Israel and its national humanitarian society has been excluded from the Red Cross International movement, which is based in Geneva. What possibly could cause the exclusion? An exclusion which is the betrayal of the fundamental principles of humanitarianism, of universality, and of impartiality. It is unjust and it is immoral. And it is one of those injustices and immoralities that can only singe one's soul. It must be remedied, and it cannot be remedied by political. It cannot be remedied by schmoozing. It cannot be remedied by nice talk. It must be remedied by action, which is so simple to do. And by remedying it, it is more than the admission of the isolated Magen David Adom into a humanitarian society it should have been part of, and indeed functionally was part of for 50 years. But it is a symbol that will have a value that goes way beyond the entrance of Magen David Adom. It will be a major symbolic step moving us towards fairness and justice. So as I close, I just want to say from my heart and my head and my soul and every ounce within me that in the hideous events of 9/11, all of us, our America soul was seared, and it was seared by hate and by injustice. Our liberty, our freedom, and our security were threatened, and we all felt it. We must never forget. This is ongoing. It is an ongoing battle for we as Americans. But we must also never forget our ally Israel, who endures this reality every day. God bless you all.
Erev Tov, good evening. My name is Bob Asher. I'm from Chicago. If I had said New York, I probably would get more applause. It is my great honor to introduce to you the Foreign Minister of Israel, Shimon Peres. Of course, Minister Peres is no stranger to AIPAC or to the AIPAC policy conferences. He has been here many times. To many people around the world, Shimon Peres is the living embodiment of the State of Israel. A child immigrant to the Jewish state, a pioneer, a founding father, a defense minister, a foreign minister, a prime minister. He has committed his entire life to the service of his country and his people, our people. Israel would not be the same vibrant, strong democracy it is today if Shimon Peres had not been such a seminal player in its history. As Director General of the Ministry of Defense in the 50s, he established Israel's military industries. As Defense Minister in the 70s, he led the transformation of the IDF into the world of modern, sophisticated military technology. As Prime Minister in the 80s, he led the transformation of the Israeli economy from one in which inflation ran in triple digits each year to one where the inflation rate was 0 in 2000 and just 1.4% last year. It was that effort that set the foundation for the Israeli high-tech miracle of the 90s and of today. Shimon Peres deeply wants to see his country living in peace and security. He has done perhaps more than any living Israeli to make that vision a reality. Unfortunately, it remains only a vision. Instead, Israelis have been facing the worst wave of terrorism aimed at its citizens since its founding 54 years ago. It is indeed a time of national crisis. And at this crucial moment, Shimon Peres has joined hands with Prime Minister Ariel Sharon to form a national unity government so that the world would know that the people of Israel are united in their common struggle to defend themselves against Palestinian terrorism. Shimon Peres is a true statesman of international standing. He is a man the world knows and respects, but above all, he is a man who loves his country and his people. And for his work, for his dedication, for his life, we owe him, the Jewish people owe him, an unrepayable debt. Ladies and gentlemen, the Foreign Minister of the State of Israel, Shimon Peres.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Dr. Healy. You moved all of us with your remark. Dear friends, for me it's a very moving occasion. I was told that this year you have a double attendance compared with the last year. And I say it is moving because this is an indication of a real wake-up of Jewish life to demonstrate a real togetherness in face of a challenging loneliness. On the 54th anniversary, Israel still can feel the echoes, the forces of making us alone, partly because of our own failures, because Jewish life was a declaration of war against conventions, against regulations, against adaptations of the evil, of the unacceptable. From our very first day of existence, we stood up against slavery, against discrimination, against hopelessness, against superiority. The first call was that all of us were born black and white, yellow and dark, by the same Lord, all of us, like one man, deserve the right to be free and equal. And maybe the greatest sentence in our Torah is that love your fellow as you love yourself. It was not accepted. We paid heavily for it. Holocaust, pogroms, sacrifices, misunderstandings, rejections. And it took a long time to agree that we have the right to be equals to others. But then we paid heavily in numbers, but remain strong in convictions. Our spirit today is as large as it used to be at the early days of our birth, so our body didn't grow strong enough. We remain a great faith in a small body. We just celebrated last week the 54th anniversary of Israel. And that again is a challenge to convention. Never before did a people that was dispersed for 2,000 years without a headquarters, without an army, without a state, without an organized way of life, stood up and gathered again to become one people. Never happened. Never happened that this choice led us to a land that was ignored, arid, burned down. And so we didn't have much experience in agriculture while being in exile. We built an agriculture which is considered maybe one of the best in the world. Not only was the land ignored, but we also met a great deal of hostility. Before we have had a state, we had a war by 7 countries, by 7 armies. We didn't have a state, we didn't have an army. And again, our fathers and forefathers were neither generals nor admirals. And yet we built an army and won all of the wars. Then again, we are the only case in history where a people made a comeback to its original language. Our children are playing in the words of our prophets, in the biblical sense, making the Bible a modern communication. It didn't happen neither to Egypt, they don't speak the Egyptian language, neither to the Italians, they don't speak the Roman language, neither to the Greeks, they don't speak the ancient Greek. The only one that speaks Hebrew, occasionally fluently, is ourselves. And then we build an educational system, a high-tech, which is not bad at all, a local Silicon Valley, and we build a democratic system, a Jewish democracy, which means as many parties as you can have, as different views you can imagine, and we never agree unless we don't have any other choice. And we feel free, not complete, not perfect, but perfectly free. And in spite of all that, our main desire remains peace. You know, I hear, particularly from Europe, that maybe the Palestinians are right. They deserve to be free, to have a state of their own, land for peace, a position in Jerusalem. The only question I have to pose, if that is the case, why should they fight? We gave back to Egypt every piece of land, every drop of water, every well of oil, without any terror. We won the war, we won the land, and we gave it back. We gave back to John all the land, all the water, without any terror and any violence. We offered the Palestinians in Camp David, under the auspices of President Clinton and our former Prime Minister Barak, an independent Palestinian state, 97% of the land, a position in Jerusalem. Why did they reject it? Why did they turn to bombs? We don't have an answer to this very moment. And mind you, the West Bank and Gaza was under Arab rule. The Jordanians never offered the West Bank to the Palestinians. The Egyptians never offered Gaza to the Palestinians. The one who did it was Israel, ourselves. The late president, the late Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin and myself went to Oslo, not because we were weak, not because we were afraid, not because we were wrong. We went there because we were and are Jewish. And we, the Jewish people, were never born to dominate another people. We want them to be as free, as prosperous, as independent as we are. They could have had it without bombs and without bullets. This is the thing that all of the Israelis don't understand. What is Arafat trying to achieve? What is aiming at? And what we are doing now, we just finished a military operation, was not our choice, but our lack of choice. We would gladly give it up, all of us, right and left. Arafat committed himself to fight terror, committed himself to tranquility, to respect, mutual respect. He should have been the one that has had to act in order to prevent illegal caches of weapons, nests of terrorists, hidden explosives that, by the way, don't make any promise for the Palestinians in the future. The only promise that exists for the Palestinians, as for us, is the negotiating table and not the hidden explosives. We did it, and it's over. Let me say a word about it. I know there was a lot of rumors, and actually I'm afraid in many countries, including European countries, we were judged by rumors, not by facts. In Jenin itself, where the rumor was that hundreds, at the beginning, thousands of Palestinians were killed, it was called a massacre. There was a fierce fighting. The real numbers are clear and simple. On the Palestinian side, they have had 50 victims, 3 of them, unfortunately, civilians, 47 armed people. On our side, we have had, to my great regret, 23 soldiers that paid with their life for the security of the country. When you have a fierce fighting, and one side is losing 23 soldiers, and the other side is losing 47, you cannot say that this is a massacre. This is a terrible fight. In a clear voice, the soldiers got orders to respect civilian life and every civilian person, and they did so. I regret the European reaction. You know, maybe there are many European politicians who represent the future of Europe. We Jewish people cannot forget the past of Europe. And we would expect the Europeans to remember what we did forget and to judge us in a real and balanced way as they should. So we feel the loneliness. I'm flying from here in another hour to Valencia, where the foreign ministers of Europe will be meeting together with the Middle Eastern foreign ministers. I shall represent a lonely voice, your lonely voice, our lonely voice, but the right voice. You must understand that us being together is really the wings that will permit me to fly to this gathering. And never did I feel the togetherness so deep, so moving, so important for the future of the Jewish people as I feel tonight. We have had many catastrophes in our history. And again, I'm saying it very sincerely. We have had one great luck, and that is the friendship and the support of the United States. Not only the synagogues, but also the churches. Not only the people, but also the administration, the media. And we carry in our heart a real sense of gratefulness and thanks. It is a miracle for Jewish life and for the Jewish state. Where in Europe, at the beginning, anti-Semitism was against the individual Jewish person. Today, I'm afraid there is anti-Semitism against the Jewish state. Where there is support for the Jewish person as an individual and for the Jewish state as a state, it is here in the United States of America. America is at war. You cannot postpone it, you cannot ignore it. You are fighting for the United States, but you are fighting for the rest of humanity. None of us, American, Chinese, French, Arab, Jew, can agree or afford living in a world where it will be a danger to enter a plane or to construct a high-rise building and eventually to drink fresh water or breathe fresh air. The terrorists will not and cannot destroy our life, our basic rights. And I saw the United States in face of suffering with such great dignity, in face of menace with such deep union. And the president that really expressed the determination to fight and win this war so people will be free and safe at the same time. We are at the same front line. We shall fight terror like any American. And though we are not the generals of this struggle, we are good soldiers. And I am sure that we shall win this war as well. All this said, that's not a mistake. We have had to have a military operation in order to bring an end, if possible, if not at least to reduce the danger of terror. We know deep in our hearts that we cannot bring an end to it just by military action. We said in advance that we are not going to stay in the Zone A, in the West Bank, and as we have promised, we are leaving, and I believe by the end of this week we shall be out of all these places. We didn't go to reoccupy the place. We didn't go to destroy Palestinian life. We didn't go to dismantle the Palestinian Authority, nothing whatsoever. It is not the Palestinians who are our enemies, it is the Palestinian terror which endangers both the Palestinians and ourselves. We went to this strike not in order to have another victory. We are not looking for a military victory. We are looking for a real peace with the Palestinian people. The purpose of the fight was not just to win a war. The purpose of the fight was to open a door for peace. Even today, we shall do our best to enable peace enter in the destinies of the Palestinians and in our own future. We have had the visit of the Secretary of the State. I think he did some important things. I would say that his main achievements were that he has harmonized a line against terror that is based upon a group of nations, particularly what they call the Quartet, the United States, United Europe, Russia, United Nations. Harmonization of these people is extremely important because in the past, the conflict of the Middle East was making a living of the Cold War. We wouldn't like to see another Cold War as a result of the conflict in the Middle East. We have to fight terror together. It is their interest and our interest. I think the Secretary also convinced the Syrians, who are on one hand a member of the Security Council in the United Nations, on the other hand, they are a quarter for insecurity in the Middle East. You have 10 headquarters of terrorism in Damascus. It cannot go together. And then also, the most important thing is to make it clear where are the options and what is the cost and where are the doors for renewing the peace process. We feel very strongly that after the military operation, the first task is to achieve ceasefire, the cessation of fire. The United States put a list of requests before Israel and before the Palestinians. We were requested to take tangible and material steps. The Palestinians were asked to take declarative and atmospheric steps. Arafat was asked to announce in a speech in his own language for the cessation of fire. For that you don't need armies. A microphone is enough. He was asked to order the troops under his command, and there are still something like 30,000 policemen that takes orders from him, and that again an order can be issued, and to reduce incitement, and he was told that he will be judged by the efforts, not by the result. Again, I think Arafat committed a great mistake by not answering this call in a positive manner. But ceasefire is needed for the Palestinians and for us. The mistakes are of the leaders, but the price is being paid by the people. None of us would like to see a single Palestinian suffer. We are not fighting their civilian life. And I think again that ceasefire is necessary not as a goal in its own right, but as I have said, a door opener to peace. We are ready to discuss not only the mechanics of a ceasefire, but also the merits of a political horizon. We want that in the wake, almost in a parallel manner, we shall start to conduct a peace process. Again, it's beginning to be clear what should be done in order to start with a ceasefire and continue with the political process. I suggested to the Secretary, whom I saw the day before yesterday, not to leave the Middle East without an American envoy. The tension is so high, the suspicion is so deep, and the United States, for the present time can really serve as a bridge between the parties. Furthermore, I suggested there will be a special American envoy that will deal with the restoration of the damages done. And again, we would like to see the Palestinians economically improving their state, their life. We know that the motives for terror are not just material, they're also economic, they're also psychological and emotional. And I know, I learned, as all of us did, that terror is not necessarily the child of poverty. But I'm afraid that poverty is a result of terror. Furthermore, our Prime Minister, our government, suggested to have a regional conference where the parties concerned will meet together in order to check the different proposals and visions on the agenda. We suggested that some Arab countries like Egypt, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Morocco, the Palestinians and us, together with the United States, maybe even together with the Quartet, will meet as soon as possible and consider the visions that are by now quite known. The American vision about two states living together in peace, it is a vision, but without a detailed mechanism how to achieve it. There is the Saudian declaration. If we don't look at the details, but we look at the general perception, it's quite positive. But I would say that if right now we have a tunnel without seeing the light at the end of it, when it comes to Saudi Arabia, we can see the light, but we cannot find the tunnel. because the Saudis themselves are not ready to negotiate. They don't suggest somebody else. But it is a pleasant surprise to see an Arab country coming from the midst of the Arab tradition, which was basically a refusing tradition, offering a full peace with the rest of the Arab world, and we take it with acknowledgement and appreciation. And then we have the results of the talks that took place between Abu Ala, who is the Speaker of the Palestinian Parliament, and myself, a more pragmatic plan saying actually 4 points. A, that the Palestinians will take upon themselves as the beginning of a process to establish a single Palestinian authority over all armed groups and all armed carriers. You know, the problem with the Palestinian Authority is they do not control organizations like the Hamas, like the Jihad. Arafat told me once, you know, you too, he told me, you have different views in your cabinet. I told him, yes, it's true. We have different views, but one rifle. You may have one view, but many rifles. And you can hardly negotiate when you have so many rifles, each of them shooting separately in a different way. It is a must, not only for peace, and surely not just for the sake of Israel, but for the sake of the Palestinians. They can never really have a serious independence unless they will have one authority governing all the killings and all the shootings. The second point is that in a short while, say in 8 weeks' time, there will be a mutual recognition. They will recognize again the state of Israel. We shall recognize a Palestinian state, yet without borders. And the third point is that we shall take a year off in order to negotiate the outstanding issues: refugees, settlement, Jerusalem, security, and another year to implement it. You know, it's a little bit of a complicated situation, but so is the situation in Israel itself. We have the right wing, we have the left wing. The problem of the left, a wing that I belong to, is they don't understand that we cannot have peace unless we shall have a majority for peace. And the problem of the right is they don't appreciate that you cannot make peace without the Palestinians. So you have to find a way that on one hand to create a majority, and the other hand to open the door for the Palestinians, if we are serious, and we are serious. Now, many people are skeptical, I know. Suppose we shall start with the ceasefire and there will be more bombs. Again, I prefer that even if there will be, God forbid, more bombs, let's have a parallel line of talking how to bring an end to the violence. Even if the plan will not work out, let's at the same time continue our efforts to bring peace. I cannot guarantee that shooting will stop, but we have to guarantee that peace talks will be continued. We need simultaneously a military deterrent and a political invitation. We shall not give up either of the two. When attacked, we shall defend ourselves. Otherwise, we shall not stop seeking peace. Let's thank together the United States for her position, supporting Israel while alone in war, and supporting Israel while trying so hard to get peace. And let's pray together that if it took us such a long time to build an independent Jewish state, and we have had many disappointments, we came over many dangers. There were moments that it looks impossible. The same will happen with peace. We shall bring together peace. Let's pray that all children in the Middle East will not have to repeat the same bloodshed and hatred and misunderstanding when we live in a modern world that can offer all children a different life, happiness, and understanding. Thank you.